There's many reasons to hire a coach. Accountability, expertise, and an often overlooked one is their ability to distill down the abundance of information that's available to us, whether it's business, fitness, whatever the endeavor is. A coach can take years off the learning curve that many of us need. In this episode, we sit down with Coach Ross Hillier to discuss this and more. This is the No Excuse to Miss podcast. Welcome to the No Excuse to Miss podcast. I am your host, Scott Volquartsen, and this week's guest is Coach Ross Hillier. He is a men's coach as well as the host of the Nomad Strength Show. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well, man. I appreciate you having me on. I really enjoyed when we got to talk over at Winter Strong, and so anytime we can chat, I'm down for it, man.
Oh, I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're busy. We were just talking about this offline. You have your second child on the way.
Yeah.
Got a list of things that you have to take care of before that happens.
Yeah, we've got all kinds of home projects and other kind of things with the business, trying to get as much ready in the next, I think we're seven weeks out. So not super close yet, but we're almost game time. So there's a lot of things that need done.
Well, I have some questions that I want to get to around that, kind of like when you decided to go out on your own, but
yeah,
I digress. What's your background and how did you kind of get into the coaching space and then eventually end up out on your own doing the podcast and different things?
Yeah. So it kind of is a really funny, like full circle trajectory, because I was in athletics my entire life. Football and track were kind of my main things. I actually went and played both in college. I was at a small college in Montana, in Helena, Montana, called Carroll College. I did both sports there. And while I was in athletics, the most fun part that I enjoy, or one of the most things that I enjoyed the most during athletics, was the actual training, like actually going into being in the gym and lifting weights and that kind of stuff. And I enjoyed the sport because you have like your teammates and all that kind of stuff, but I really enjoyed the weight room part of it. And that always just kind of became something I gravitated towards. And I wanted to learn and understand more about how do I get better at something over here in this room? Like, how does this impact everything else I'm doing over here? And so that became kind of like my hobby in school, because I wasn't in school for like kinesiology or any of these other things that a lot of coaches are in school for. My, quote unquote training, if you could call it that, in school was actually in communications and business stuff, more specifically radio. And my whole dream at the time was the ESPN radio gig and do like the sports talk show and that kind of stuff. And I actually had a couple internships in college at the local ESPN affiliates, and then one right as I got out of college at another one in Idaho. So that was really that was what I was going to do. And I have, I still enjoy sports radio as kind of like a detached, here's we can go do this over here and have fun. It doesn't have to be so serious kind of a thing, which is probably why I really enjoyed it.
And, that's interesting because I've talked to a lot of former college athletes, and they go through a spell where the last thing they want to ever do is see the inside of a gym.
Right.
They're like, I've had to do this for the last, probably junior high school, and then college is a whole nother level. And they're like, I'm done working out for a while, or, I've done enough. I want to take it easy.
Well, I'll tell you right now, because of track in college, I went a couple of years without ever running. And it was because of that, like that exact same thing. I was like, I've done more running in the last 4 years than most people will do in 20. So I'm going to take a break for a couple of years and not really have to worry about this, because I'm kind of over it right now. And so when I was done with college, my now wife, we were just dating at the time, got a job up in the Boise area. I'm from Southern Idaho, where we were both from. It was about an hour and a half away, but we had done the distance thing for like 2 years. And I'm like, you know what? I don't really need to do that anymore because I'm not in school, and I'll just come up, find a job, and I'll just make it work. And I proposed to her later that year. So it was like, we'll kind of get up and get some things figured out up in the Boise area. And the first thing I did was get a job at a gym, because I'm like, I can be in here, I can do stuff and work with people. And that's how I actually started training people. And I was going to get another job at the local radio station at the same time, and ended up not happening just because I really got into the training thing. And I didn't expect that at all. Like, I was something that I really enjoyed doing, but I didn't ever think of it as the career move. And so when I got in there, and I was at a big, kind of the big box gym, like a Gold's type gym. It's a local place here. They've got a couple of places where they're feeding you clients all the time, which those kind of places get made fun of a lot when you're a coach, because it's like, that's kind of the lower rung of coaching, right? Is getting the clipboard trainer and the Gold's Gym kind of gig, right? But the really awesome thing about it was they just feed you so many people. You get to see and work with so many people in a short amount of time that I didn't have to worry about getting clients. Like, they're the ones giving me people to work with. And so over the course of the 2+ years I was there, I mean, I had thousands of hours of coaching in those couple of years. And like, that kind of coaching I experienced, that's you can't replicate that in any other scenario. So that was really cool.
Well, and I think that's something that's missed so often, whether it's in the gym or even just in business. People see, whether it's on Instagram or whatever, they think there's a fast track to success.
Yes.
But in anything, putting in the work at the ground level and working with all sorts of different clients, and like you said, literally thousands of hours in a relatively short time, to me is the only way that you're able to start to hone your craft. And I would imagine it helped you kind of develop, like, who was the person you wanted to work with.
Exactly. Yeah. And the other thing, and this is probably just my personality, after a couple of years of being in that system and seeing how it operates from like a business standpoint, whether or not this was actually accurate, I kept saying, well, I could run it better than this. Like, and I'd been at that point, we had been married a couple of years. And so I'm like, okay, I'm ready to kind of like take this up to the next level, because I'd basically capped myself out on what I was potential of earning at a thing, because they take so much cut from a session rate to go back to the gym. All that kind of stuff that you hear about, that kind of stuff is true. The trainers don't get paid very much. So that's why there's such high turnover in those places. So if you're going to make it like a career, you're either going to move up and become like a manager of the gym where you're not coaching anybody anymore, or you're going to leave and do your own thing. And so I was like at that place where they were talking to me about wanting to like move up and do some managerial type stuff. And I'm just like, I really don't want to do that and be here and do that. But I can run a business coaching and coach and do it better than I think is happening here. And again, whether or not that was true at the time, that's what I believed. So I pieced out of there I've had some business coaches recommend that people not leave jobs the way that I did. And I didn't leave it in a bad way, but I left it very quickly without much backup happening.
Oh.
I'm so
were you married at the time?
Yes, we had been married.
Was your wife on board?
So that's the amazing thing. Yes.
Okay.
And I don't think that I could, I know that I couldn't have done it had she like not, been okay with me doing and I've had several decisions that were like this, where I'm like, I get something in my head and I'm like, look, I know this is going to work. We're going to make this work. This is the idea. I can figure this out. And she's like, I trust you, go do it. And I'm like, boom, it's not like a permission thing, but it's the motivation thing. It's like I trust you now. And that gives me a little bit of fire to go do it. Right.
I had somebody once put it to me, like, our wives or, significant others, whoever it is, doesn't necessarily have to understand our motivation.
Right.
But they have to believe in us to allow us to go do that thing, whatever it might be.
And it's huge because in that moment I had been in this gym, and this is kind of a weird tangent, but I started doing like this. You'll appreciate this actually. I started doing like some personal defense and weapons training stuff out of this facility that a lot of these places exist now that does this kind of stuff like concealed carry training and home defense and room clearing, all this kind of stuff. There's a facility out here that I started doing all this stuff in. And I noticed they had a bunch of weight training equipment over on the side of their warehouse. I'm like, what's all this for? Do you guys like work out here in your spare time? They're like, no, we have some trainers that pay us like rent to just come and train their clients here. And it's kind of just a little deal for them. And I'm like, really? And so like my ears perked up and I'm like, I started talking to the gal that was kind of the head of the training area. And she's like, yeah, it's just, at the time it was like $300 a month, come in and you can train your clients as much as you want, bring as many in here. You'll have a key, you can come in. And like $300 a month, I mean, in my head, I'm like, that's nothing. Like if that's all I got to pay for quote unquote rent to come use all this equipment and bring my clients in. So I left and went home that day. And I was telling my wife about it. And 2 days later, I had drawn up this whole plan on how I was going to leave the gym. And I showed her and she's like, then that same thing. She's like, awesome. If you want to do it, go ahead. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm putting in my 2 weeks tomorrow. And so she's like, oh, okay. And like, we're doing it now. And so I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And so I went in next day and put in I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks at the time. And I'm like, okay, I've got a few weeks to, probably isn't the best way to do it, but poach a couple of my clients that told me they were going to come with me from here. And it was enough to get me started. And then from there, it was just like all of the business things you fall and like you learn all that stuff at the beginning and you do things wrong. And it's been 7 years now since I've done that thing and left out on my own. And my business has looked several different ways since then, but that's kind of how business is. It always evolves.
Yeah. Do you think that approach of, drawing it up in 2 days, putting in your 2 weeks, looking back, do you think if you wouldn't have done it that way, you would have drawn it out, like constantly looking for just the right time?
Absolutely.
I'll get this part of the business done, all the, paperwork, and I'll move on to this part. Then I'll move on to this part. And, over that time, you end up spending a year doing what you did in 2 weeks.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it was just because I was in such a place where I was ready to do something right then. Like if I was still in that sounds cool. Maybe I'll do that one day. Like I would have just found every way to delay the action needed to actually go do that. But I was kind of in a place mentally where I'm like, look, this is getting old here. I need something fresh that I can kind of have and make it my own. And then it was like all of these things kind of just came into play. Like I was at that facility and I saw that stuff and I had those conversations and she's like, yeah, we can start whenever you want. Like the gal that was running the training thing. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll reach out to you next week. And she's like, sounds good. And then I'm like, okay, that must mean we're doing it then. And so like I said, I've had some business coaches in the past that like when they're talking to people that are doing they're working their normal job and they're trying to build a business on the side. I've had a coach that recommended, like, hey, the general recommendation is like have 3 months of expenses and all that kind of stuff built up so you can go in and when you're ready, put 90 days at 100% focus into the new thing and like kind of burn the boats mentality, but give yourself 3 months. And then I told him that story and he's like, man, I would not have done that at all, but good for you.
So is your business now primarily in-person coaching or online?
It's primarily online. I made that was another kind of switch that in the business that I made a couple of years ago, in the fall of 19. So my firstborn was like 6 months old at the time. So this was prior to all the COVID stuff in spring of 2020, where all the gyms in the world shut down. So I don't know whether that was some foresight or divine help or whatever it was, but it gave me about 7 months of prep to move my whole business online before I wouldn't have even been in the gym and would have had to figure it out in kind of a panic mode spring. And that came from me just wanting to have some more flexibility with my time. To be around with my newborn son and have some more things I wanted to do and have a little bit even more control over it. And the online really provided that for me, because when you're in the gym, like even if you own your own thing, you're still on other people's schedules, because the gym world is your early mornings and after. I mean, you're working on the opposite hours of the workday, so you're pretty much always there. And so the online thing allowed me to still provide a lot of coaching and a lot of help for people but do it in a different way that gave me a little bit even more freedom. And so, yeah, I still have a couple of younger kids that I like to train locally just because I enjoy being in person, and that kind of helps keep my coach's eye a little sharp to see stuff in person. But that's a really like, I've trained their dad for years. Like I've known them forever. So it's really kind of like I don't do it often, but if it's the right person, I'll train people locally still.
Well, I know, like, at least for me personally, I feel like hiring a coach now is probably more important than ever.
Yeah.
We have more information available than ever. So it's easy to say, I'll just go find something online. I'll go do this. I'll go do that. But I think there's a couple factors that come into play there. One, if you're trying to follow a free plan, there's not a lot of accountability or motivation to follow that free plan.
Yep.
If you have some skin in the game, it becomes something you're a little more dedicated to. But I almost think you need a coach that specializes in it now, whether it's business or fitness, whatever it is, to help kind of navigate all the information that's out there.
And the amazing thing about it now is because of the way that we can connect with these people, it can be so specific to what it is that you actually want to do. It doesn't have to just be like some general business coach that like can apply the same methods or whatever to anybody that walks in. There are those people, but like you can find, like in my case, I can find people that are fitness online coaches that have worked with men's groups like I do. Right. Like it can be that specific, and they've built multiple like $1 million businesses, and they can, you don't have to necessarily copy what they're doing, but it's just the same reason you would ever have a coach for anything. It's to help kind of cut those learning curves down and give you some more experience in a shorter amount of time than all of the failing that you're going to do between now and then. And you're still going to have those moments where like things aren't going to work and you're like, hey, that was a terrible decision, whatever, I'm going to eat that. But you're going to have fewer of those when you have somebody telling you, hey, don't do that kind of a thing.
Yeah. And did you find, you mentioned that you specifically work with, men, and I assume a certain target range and age. When you first started out, were you that specific, or were you more anybody that's willing to pay right now? I need I need to get this business going. I'll take any clients I can get.
Pretty much. And especially when I was in the gym, still in the gym, because I taught classes that were pretty similar to CrossFit classes where we did functional movements and just the environment. I had all kinds of people coming in because, again, at the time, yes, that was part of it where I'm trying to build a business and I can't be picky yet, and part of it was that just provides more context for the patterns that I'm seeing in people's movement. Like if you're always going to look at the same type of person, you're going to see similar things come up, but you can expand that swath of people that you work with. You're going to cover every, like there's no movement pattern or no poor posture, no whatever that I really haven't seen because of the amount of people that I've had to work with across the spectrum of age and male or female or any of this kind of stuff. Like you can say you've seen everything at this point. Whether or not how you fix it is different, but I've seen all the things, And
I would imagine the physical component is just one aspect of getting to work with a client one-on-one. Yeah. Then it becomes, where are they at in their life? What else do they have going on? What phase are they at in work in their life, relationships, kids, family, all that stuff.
Yeah. And the one thing that's interesting that I noticed when we made the switch to online was I actually had an easier time getting into that type of stuff with the people that I was working with. And I don't think it has anything to do with like the distance or whatever, but I was just able to structure the way I coach in a way where we could provide some more context around what's actually happening in these guys' lives. And so to kind of go further with that earlier question, it wasn't until about 1.5 years ago that I really started narrowing down and focusing on, this is where I feel I can help the best. If it's just about workouts, I can put anybody through a workout. And honestly, I say this all the time, like people, if you're just looking for workouts, like you don't need me to just get a workout. Like, there's 2 billion free workouts on Google. Like you don't need me for that. Like, and this goes back to like the purpose for coaching is you can find someone who has been or wants to take you exactly where you want to go. It can be that specific. And so I really started focusing more on, well, where have I been? And like, what kind of things have I gone through that I can relate back to the guys that I work with? And so it ended up being like, guys that are young fathers, that a lot of them are either business owners or they're guys who are like working side hustles and like, they're craftsmen and stuff, but they work at a main job, but they have this thing that they love over here. So time is really important. Right. But they still want to be family men, and they have all of these other things. And so it's more like a personality kind of demographic rather than just like, hey, it's guys age 26 to 38. And, it's more like, what is your purpose for what you're training?
And that's a great point too. You just mentioned that kind of guy. We can read all day that we're supposed to get 8 to 9 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
Anybody that's gone through having young kids, trying to build a business, or even just work at a job knows that that's next to impossible.
Right.
They may know they need 8 or 9, but if the baby's crying in the middle of the night and it's your turn to get up,
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
They don't care that you had a tough workout and you need to get your 8 hours of sleep.
Well, and here's the beautiful part about how we can provide some more context to that too, because in that scenario, the last thing that a guy wants to hear is like, dude, well, you're supposed to get 8 hours. And he's like, yes. I freaking know that. That's not the problem. Like, the problem is all of these other commitments that I have that I am going to give myself to and make sure that all this stuff gets done. And so it's like, how do we fit this stuff in and enhance everything else because of the training, because of the things that we're doing physically, instead of pulling away from it because it's kind of like this selfish endeavor. It's like, I have to do all of this stuff. I have to make sure I'm sleeping 8. I have to make sure I'm eating every meal at this exact time. Like, that's just not realistic for a lot of the guys in the situations that I'm working with.
Exactly. So what do you think? Because I still feel like a lot of, and in particular, men are reluctant to hire a coach.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think they feel like they can get the free workouts online, or, that lone wolf mentality? I can do this. It's just a matter of I need to buckle down. And I'm sure for some people there's a cost involved, but what do you think is what is one of the number one barriers that you see when people are trying to decide whether it's hire you or any coach?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it was actually something that I pushed off as it related to my business for much longer than I should have, for that exact reason. It's like, well, look, there's all kinds of free content out here. I can utilize this free content and do this on my own and figure some stuff out. And you know what? You might be able to figure out a little bit of it, right? But it goes back to, you're going to just waste so much time that you don't need to waste if you had somebody there that's guiding you along. Like, I make the analogy, it's kind of a silly one, but the coach is not Hercules in the story. The coach is the little Danny DeVito goat man Phil thing from the cartoon movie. Like, that's who the coach is. Like, and so we tend to think that the coach is Hercules, like they're the ones that's the whatever. It's like, no, we're actually just the ones that's kind of steering the ship a little bit and helping the person to find what they're looking for, find the way to do it on their own. It's not just giving you all this stuff, it's teaching you how to do all this stuff on your own. And I think with a lot of guys, there's two things. There's a pride issue with a lot of guys that don't want to admit that they've gotten to a place that they're not happy with. And so they don't want to let other people know and be accountable to another person for that. Right. And it's because I got here, through my own whatever I can fix it on my own. Right. But the other thing is like that accountability factor. Maybe a lot of guys, especially like once you get into their 30s and beyond, it's been 15, 20 years since they've had a coach in anything. Yeah. Right. So they outside of a boss that they work for, which isn't really the same, but kind of is, like, they're not really accountable for their habits that they do that they have in their lifestyle. And so that is a very big barrier to overcome for a lot of guys. And I was the same with my business. Like and you talked about the skin in the game thing. I believe it's directly proportional to the amount of success that you're going to have. Like if you put some skin in the game, like say you pay for, because there's all kinds of things out there that you can pay for or invest in yourself. If it's, a $25 a month like Facebook group, right? You're going to be invested $25 a month worth.
Yes.
Right. But if
Exactly.
you're gonna go drop $5,000 on a coaching program for the year or for 6 months or whatever it is, you bet your butt you're going to be invested and do whatever you can to make that work, because you're like, I dropped some serious change on this. I have to make this work. And so you're going to be invested that amount, like emotionally, not just financially too.
Yeah, that is a great point. And I think you touched on this earlier. Without a coach, you may eventually find out where you kind of got off track.
Yeah.
But with the right coach, they're going to pick up on that long before we see it in ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it is business or, fitness, whatever the endeavor is, and I know I've over the years, I've spent a lot of money on different coaches in different areas. And I look back and I'm like, I don't think there's any way that I would have the outlook on life I do now without having those guys there to call me out.
Totally.
And I was always one, especially in our industry, that I always thought what all these other business coaches were teaching didn't apply to our industry, because for some reason in the back of my mind, I'm like, we're different.
Right.
We're a family business. We're in a, kind of a different industry that we can't do a lot of the mainstream advertising that many places do.
Yeah.
But the more I went down the rabbit hole of coaching, I realized whether you're a fitness coach, whether you're, in the gun industry like we are, it comes down to being able to connect with people and building relationships, and so much of that I think is intertwined, even like, I would guess the more that you get people in shape or to stick to a plan, the more self-confidence they build.
Absolutely.
Which then allows them to actively go find more events to go to.
Yeah. Or just be more decisive, or just any of these other things that are going to apply to their life outside of what we're doing in the gym. I'll give you a perfect example. I run these 6 to 8 week, I call them the foundations course, right? It's kind of like the basic understanding of everything that I believe philosophically with health. It's kind of like my onboarding program when guys want to come in and work with me. So I ran one back at the beginning of the year. And a good friend of mine was in the program, and he was working at a university in the admissions office, kind of like a normal 9 to 5. He also has a podcast. So he has these other things that are kind of on the side. But he has this business that he created, it's such a rad idea. It's called Suburban Farm Guy. And literally what he would do is he would go to people who live in the suburban areas, or in these condensed areas, and teach them how to plot out gardens in their home or in their backyard with whatever space they have, and they actually would go back and tend to those gardens, if people are too busy to even do it on their own. I'm like, that's a unbelievably brilliant idea. And it was just kind of like this side thing that he had forever. And so we go through this program. A big part of the program is how do we write goals? How do we set goals? And how do we actually do it, rather than just say, I want to do this one day, right? That's super weak language, so weak. We have a very specific process where it's we have a date that we're going to do it by. It's concisely written, it's powerfully worded, and it gives you some drive to want to actually go do that thing. So we went through this whole process. He goes through 6 weeks. The week after his group completed, he quit his university job, got a loan from another business investor in town to basically pay for his whole first year in the business, and went all in on his thing. And now he's been 2 or 3 months into it, and it's exactly what he wanted. And I'm not going to say that was because of what we did, but there are things in there that just help you become more decisive and when you have an understanding of what it is that you actually want, it's really easy to create a plan to go do that thing. But most people don't actually know what they want.
How gratifying is that for you then? Like,
oh man, it was
to
so
see
cool.
somebody that goes through one of your programs, go do that, knowing you made a difference in, that person's life. Like you said, it may not be the whole reason why you did it, but just to know that you're a small part of letting that guy, live out his dreams.
It was so cool. And when he told us, he told us in one of the group calls that he was making the move or whatever. And all of us in the group were just like so pumped for him. And honestly, like the physical stuff is cool, right? Like you can lose the weight and get lean and build some muscle and stuff. And I've said for as long as I've been coaching, like this is the avenue I chose rather than being a psychiatrist, but it's basically the same job. I just like working out better, right? Like it's all human growth and development, right? I just went this route with training and fitness because for men, that's usually the easiest starting point. Like that's the lowest hanging fruit for a lot of guys that don't have the discipline or don't have the habits yet. Like we can start a fitness habit much simpler than we can a lot of other things in life that maybe seem a little bit too big. It's like, well, we can sweat every day for 20 minutes. Well, let's start there. And that usually is enough to get the ball rolling to where all of these other things start happening as a result of just the discipline you've created from training.
I think that's a great way to look at it. When these guys come to you, what do you see like as, obviously you're a fitness coach, but what do you see like one of their number one things that's holding them back? Is it, like lack of nutrition knowledge, or is it, just lack of movement because so many of us are sedentary behind a desk now? Or is it like more just stress related? Because I feel like we live in such a overly stressed world right now.
Yeah. I'm going to say yes, because it's all of them.
Okay.
So, but honestly, it's funny because I'll hit them one at a time. The nutrition thing is really funny because most people, and I would say most, like a very high percentage, like probably in the 90s percentage, actually know what it is that they're supposed to eat. Like it's not like I could walk into most like first or second grade classrooms at my wife's school and be like, hey kids, what are the healthy foods you're supposed to eat? And for the most part, they would probably be all like, oh, fruits and vegetables and meat and eggs. And they'd be like, yep, that's it. Pretty much, right? Like there's obviously some nuance to it when you have certain goals that you're trying to achieve. But from a what do I eat standpoint, people pretty much know. And what happens is there's so much stuff that they get hit with on a daily basis of this plan or this thing or whatever. There's so much it's purposefully trying to confuse them. And so I'm like, let's just strip all that away. Look, like I have I call it the one ingredient rule, right? Like if it's only one ingredient, like it is the thing that we say it is, like it's meat, right? There's no other ingredients in that. If it's a carrot, right? Like there's no other, like a potato. And they're like, well, what about white potatoes versus sweet potatoes? I'm like, this is some really in the weed stuff that you don't need. Like you had McDonald's 3 times last week. Like you don't need to be worrying about white versus sweet potatoes. You know what I mean? Those kind of things. So like when you strip it down,
you'll hear people talk about fruit, like certain fruit has, a higher glycemic index. And if you're trying to lose weight, you should eat certain fruits, which I understand. Like you said, if you're trying to, if you're in really good shape and trying to take it that one step further, but for the majority of the population, it's not a banana or an apple or blueberries that is what's causing them a problem.
No, it's the pint of ice cream at 9 p.m. every night.
Yeah, like it's the Big Mac followed by the banana. That's the problem.
Yes, exactly. And so it's usually the whole purpose of this is really try to simplify it and make it easy as possible. With the movement thing, when you couple those two things together, because we're told so often, it's like, hey, move more, eat less, right? And less isn't really helpful for a ton of people. What I would rather them do is just increase their activity. Because if we're trying to lose weight, you're still going to create a caloric deficit, but you're just creating it by moving more and expending more rather than eating less food. Because when people hear that, they eat way too less. Like they go way too far that direction.
Do you ever find when they go too far that direction, then they don't even have the energy to
Totally
increase their movement levels?
Yeah. And we're a snake eating its tail all the time. Like it's always something that we're chasing. And so when most of the time priority is when it comes to movement is how do we increase, because you mentioned like most of us are sedentary behind a desk or we're just not moving very much. The priority is increasing our non-exercise activity. So if you're going to the gym for 45 minutes an hour, or 45 minutes a day, that's fantastic, right? But if you go to the gym for 45 minutes a day and then you sit for 11 more hours that day, you're not, I'm not going to say you're counteracting that workout, but you're really not letting it do what it could be doing by just going for a couple of walks. Like that's really all it takes. Like if you did 3 or 4 10-minute walks a day, like that would do massively more for most people than training brutally hard an hour every single day. Like just get out and move and do that kind of stuff, or like stand up and stand at your desk and work, or like just do these small things that are increasing your movement or activity throughout the day would do far more for the majority of people than be like, I'm just going to wreck myself 6 days in the gym. And then I'm 10 days in and now I hate my life because this sucks and I hurt all the time. And so I'm going to quit and start a new program the next week. Like that's just the cycle that I see so often. So it's not like we're starting easy and I'm going to ease you really into it, but we're just approaching it in a different way. We're still going to train hard, but we're training hard 3 days a week. And maybe we have a cardio intensive day where we get outside and we do like a 60 or 75 minute hike, or maybe we just go find a hill in a park and do some sprints up it for a little bit. But the other things during the day, I just want you moving, like get up and walk around. If you've been at your desk for 90 straight minutes, like get up and walk around the block and come back and work again. Like you've done, because your chances are you're not actually working for that full 90 minutes. You know what I mean? Like most people are like, I'm at work for 8 hours, but you're really only working like a few of those hours when it comes down to all of the other things you're doing at your desk. Like,
and I would almost guess that going up and walking around the block, you're going to come back and be way more productive and get more done than if you just would have powered through at your desk.
100%. And so it's little habits like that really end up compounding the most. Yes, the training part's important, but the other lifestyle aspects of it, of turning your whole life into it. And again, this is like, I say we do this in a whatever kind of a week program and instill some of these habits, but this is like lifelong stuff. This isn't like you're going to have all this stuff figured out in 12 weeks, right? Like this is stuff that's we're training for, like I'm training to be the OG grandpa that can still deadlift when I'm in my 80s. Right. You know what I mean? Like that's one of my goals, like have grandkids and stuff running around. They're like, oh, dang, grandpa's a stud. You know what I mean? Like he's still out here kicking our butts. Like that's the kind of stuff that when you have an outlook that is in decades rather than weeks or months, it changes everything. And that's like I talked about some of the goal setting stuff. Like we have a major focus on how do we want to, what kind of things do we want to achieve in 10 and 20 years rather than just like in 30 days.
Awesome. So, speaking of that, I was just going to little side tangent here. I was just at Summer Strong a couple of weeks ago, and I think
couldn't go.
Richard Soren's a perfect example of that.
Perfect.
I don't know his exact age, but he's in his mid 70s.
Yep.
And, he admitted he's not in his best shape and he's not as healthy as he once was, but he still pulled, 320 pounds.
Yeah. How many other 70-something-year-olds are going to do that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I bet you could probably count them on 2 hands.
Yes. Minimal warm up. It wasn't like it was this long drawn out warm up. He pulled a couple lighter weights, pulled it and walked off.
Sits there, watches everybody else lift, his knee wraps around his jeans, and then just walks up and rips it off the ground and walks off.
That's exactly what happened.
That's the coolest.
There's not many 70. Like I said, I'm not exactly sure how old he is, but not many people at his age that could walk up and do that.
No, not at all. And I mean, and then you look at everything that's cascaded down from that. When you talk about how I'm going to instill this in my family, right? Because that's another thing that when I'm working with a lot of these guys, are like, well, my family's just not very healthy. Like, I want to improve that. So I 100% believe that it starts with the man in the family. Like, if you're going to be the one that sets the tone for that, the people in your house are going to follow. And then and the Sorens are like a perfect example, because look at his grandkids, look at Bert's kids.
Yes.
Like, they get up there and they do that deadlift thing too, and they're super involved in all this kind of stuff, and they understand it because they've known nothing else their entire life. Like, the physical aspect of life is just second nature to them.
Yes. And we can preach until we are blue in the face with our kids, but they follow our actions, not anything that, they can see if we're congruent with what we say that you should be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, I talked to, I think it's been probably about a year now or so, but I had Bert on my show, and he told me a really funny story when he was growing up, because I asked him like this exact question, like, how did your dad kind of begin to instill this in you? And he's like, well, he kind of hacked it at the beginning, because I can't remember how old he was, 11 or 12 or something like that. But he told me every workout I did, he'd give me $5. So he's like, there was like, I can't remember, there was something that he wanted to buy. And he's like, well, if I just go and work out, Pops is going to give me $5 every time. So he's like, over the course of a month, I made like, I don't know, $60, $70 because I worked out 3 times a week. I was like, maybe, I don't know if most like therapists would agree with that method, but it worked out for you, man. Like, he's like, yeah, it was pretty great. So, I mean, but those kind of things, like you said, they're going to follow the example more than just telling them. Like, they're going to see it. And my little one, he just turned 3 2 days ago. Like, my wife trains at a local CrossFit gym here, and she has for several years. And then I train out of the house most of the time. Like, I've got a setup in the backyard and that kind of stuff. So he always sees us doing something, and he's always like walking around. He'll pick up something and do a squat with it, or like he'll pick up a random teddy bear and do like kettlebell swing with it. And he's like, Dad, look, a swing. And he'll do a kettlebell swing. And I'm like, that's killer, dude. Yeah, you actually have better form than about 80% of the people that I coach.
And I think that's a great point, though, is it doesn't have to, some people like you, myself, we enjoy going into the gym and doing a session.
Yeah.
For a lot of people that don't enjoy that, it doesn't have to be, like you said earlier, 45 minutes in a gym with this really structured environment.
Yeah.
It's a lifestyle of just more movement, pick up heavy things.
Yeah.
Like you said, swing an axe.
Yeah, exactly.
Our friend Greg does the Wilford Grade maces.
Yes.
A completely different style of training that is just as awesome.
Well, and that's the other thing too, that to bring it back to the coaching thing, that's one of the awesome things about how much there is available right now, because you can decide who you fit best with personality wise, right? Like, you're not just pigeonholed into this one person that you're like, I just, if I don't match well with that personality, I know I'm not going to be very successful. Like, and that about yourself when you meet somebody, you're like, I'm just not going to get what I can from you.
And they might be the best coach in the world.
Exactly. But not for you.
You don't match that personality, or, whatever that connection is, I don't think it's going to work.
And by the way, that works in the inverse part of the relationship too. Like, as a coach, like, before I bring people on, I usually will have like a phone call conversation with them. And yes, it's it's to learn about what they want to do and what their kind of goals they have, where their history was. But part of it is kind of like, hey, are me and you going to mesh? Because if this relationship, because this is a relationship, that's what coaching is. And so if this isn't going to mesh well between the two of us, both of us are wasting our time, because it's not going to matter what I say if it doesn't, if you're not going to hear it, and the inverse of that is true as well.
And I think that takes a great coach to recognize that and save that person money.
Yeah.
And even, at times be able to recommend, hey, I'm not the right guy for you, but
yes,
here's somebody else that I could recommend.
Yes.
And I think that gives the coaches a lot of credibility that they're willing to help that person find the right match.
Absolutely. And all it does is, even though it wasn't the fit for you, that still builds trust with them, with that coach. Like, even if they're not their coach, they still trust them way more now. And so on a referral basis, they're like, wow, he actually said I wasn't going to be working for him. So he really must know this guy will be good for me, And so and I think it takes time for a lot of coaches to get to that point, especially at the beginning of the careers, because they're like, I just want to work with everybody, right? Like, or I have to work with everybody. I can't afford to not work with everybody. But at some point, saying maybe not this isn't the right fit, I'll put you in touch with somebody else, is actually going to be better for your business, because that person, even though they're not your customer, your client, they're gonna be like, hey, this guy's awesome. He referred me out, and it wasn't, I have people I know that would fit with him because I know them, and so it's all the organic stuff of business that really helps it last.
I always feel like that stuff comes full circle.
Yeah.
Even in our industry, I watched my dad when he first got started. He would work and repair and do anything just to put food on the table.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until he started to narrow his focus and become more dialed in on one specific area of the industry that he was able to start growing.
Sure. Yeah.
It sounds, backwards, but the more he narrowed his focus down and almost eliminated certain customers from the mix, the more his business grew.
It was the same exact thing for me too. I mean, like the example that I was always given from one of my coaches was, you can't just throw a net out into the ocean expecting to catch a very specific fish.
Yeah.
Because chances are, if you just throw nets out in random places, you're not going to catch anything. Like you can't train everybody, or you're going to end up training nobody. Like, you have to understand, like, you solve a very specific problem for a very specific type of person. And there was actually a real big hurdle that I had to overcome. And I had to get talked through it a lot, because I would have these conversations with one of my coaches, and I would say things like, well, if I'm not going to work with all these people, think about all these people I'm not going to be able to help anymore. Like, that was my approach. Like, think about all these people I'm not going to be able to help anymore. And he flipped the language part of it on me, and he said, okay, so now think about all the people that you will be able to help now. Like, and those people are going to be way more invested in what you're doing because you solved their problem, rather than everybody else is, at a 60%, right? Like, people are way more invested when you can get narrowed down and solve, and like, you feel like you're talking to them. Like, when they feel that you're talking to them directly, like, that's huge for business growth and stuff. And so, like, there's some industries where it's like, yeah, we want as many customers as possible, right? But even those ones are like, we're still hitting a specific type of person,
100%. You always have your fringe customers that you can work with.
Yeah.
But you still have to have that core demographic that's passionate about what you're doing.
Yep, exactly.
So I want to switch gears a little bit, and let's talk about your podcast that you've been doing. I know it's called the Nomad Strength Show. Mm-hmm. You're doing that. And then you're also, you've just recently launched a Patreon show.
Yes.
And I listened to your podcast that you did on that, on, why you launched it. Mm-hmm. I think on the surface, a lot of people think that when you launch that, it's strictly to make money on the back end.
Right.
But you brought up a very interesting point, is it gives you more freedom to kind of talk about what you want to talk about, without the restrictions that happen so much with, social media and so many different things. Sure. It allowed you to kind of control the narrative a little bit more. Is that correct?
Yes. And part of it was, and that's an interesting way of thinking about it too, because with that show that's in the Patreon, yes, I'll start there.
Okay.
But I don't want that to sound like, because I run my show, right? Like the regular podcast, I don't answer to anybody or whatever like that. And it's not a show where I'm like going out of my way to see what I can say and not get censored. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I don't do that on purpose. I've had some shows that probably, if it had a bigger reach than it does, probably would be on Spotify's radar at some point. You know what I mean? But those kind of things, I wanted to have the Patreon thing really be more of like a thank you. Like, so this extra content and all of these other things, it's like, hey, I'm going to pull back the curtains a little bit on some of the stuff that you guys don't see or hear as it relates to the podcast, and give you some more behind the scenes stuff. We can do some, because the the podcast that is the patron only one, I call it Unplugged. And the reason for that is just because of my love for the old MTV Unplugged that they used to do in the 90s. And so it's like, it's not really like I'm unplugged because I still have to be literally plugged in to make it sound good, right? But it's more just a departure because I can kind of go on some different things with the show that I don't specifically do with the regular podcast, because with the regular one, it's strength, health, and the outdoors. And so everybody generally fits into that box in the most part. It's development, it's all that kind of stuff. But there are some things that don't just fit the tone of the regular podcast that I do want to talk about, and sometimes it's time sensitive stuff of things that are happening around, locally or nationally or whatever. And that's not like a politics show by any means, but sometimes there's just things that I want to go over, and that would be a better avenue for that. So as a way to kind of say thank you for people supporting the show with their dollars, right? Because that's like a huge ask for free content that I can put out, whatever, like to now say, hey, here's some extra stuff if you guys want to support it with your money. Like that's kind of a really big thing for me, because I'm like, okay, it's just a podcast, like, but I have people that are like, you should do some more stuff or whatever. And so that became part of it.
So a question on that, you just mentioned free content, and something I'm always interested in when it comes to like people in the fitness industry where their content is what drives or makes their money, is how do you balance like how much free content you need to put out there? Because people obviously have to find you and like what you're doing. Yeah. But at the same point, I assume you have to keep some of that to make a living and put,
That's really interesting, because I thought that way for a really long time. And it was like, I can only put out this much, right? I can't let people see everything, because what am I going to charge for? Right. But we talked about before, coaching is a relationship, right? And me solving a specific problem for that person. So that's what people want to invest in. Right. It's not like the stuff or the content I put out. So I'm a believer, like I'll put out my best stuff in content, because that's just going to increase my trust with them. And then they come to me because they want to work with me. It's not because like I have a program, because like I said before, if all you want's workouts, go Google them. I have not created anything in the workout space. Like all of the stuff that I do has been around for decades. I just kind of package it a little bit differently because it's what I like, And so I'm a firm believer, like I'll answer any question about anything. I'll do a podcast on it. I'll do posts on it. I'll do anything to put out content that would help somebody. And then they'll come because they want to work with me personally. And that's, I believe all that does is just enhance that trust in that relationship before they're actually even a client. Like they know that I'm not holding anything back from them before they're even a client. So they're like, if I work with him, he's going to tell me what's up, because he's already telling me all this stuff that I didn't pay for. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it eliminates, I guess, the, so much what's done in that space of, the huge promises, the 30-day, drop 300 pounds and, all that stuff in 30 days, right. Because people know, they know what you stand for, and they know that it's going to take time, and it's, I think even the idea that you mentioned, you do like a 6 to 8 week thing, I think is a, great business idea, because it requires people to be invested longer than just that initial honeymoon window.
Well, and I'll tell you right now, I tell them at the beginning, I'm like, this is the prequel to everything else. Like we are not done when 8 weeks is over. Like that's literally you opening the book. Like this is just so, and the reason I do that program is because I just want everybody to understand how I talk and like the way that I explain things. And so we can all be on the same page, but this is like the crash course, the onboarding. So you just understand how I do everything. Now, when the 8 weeks is over, now the journey's actually started. So because I was real hesitant about that for that reason, about doing like a 6 week or 8 week program, because I don't want it to be in their mind. It's like, hey, I'm going to go in for 8 weeks. I'm going to crush it. And then I'm good. Like, that's not what we're doing here. Like I come in and we do goal setting week 1. I'm like, and I start talking about what we're going to do in 20 years. And everybody's like, whoa, okay, this is a lot longer term than what I was thinking. But like, that's the point.
And like you said, it's a lifestyle. It's not a 8-week
exactly
crash course and everything changes.
Yeah, we're instilling habits. It's not just like the surfacey level goals. If I want to lose 15 pounds, yeah, okay, everyone does. And like, what are we going to do and instill that in our life? And how are we going to make those habits?
And something I've learned is, I've done coaching with a certain person for a couple years. Then I'm like, I have all the programs I need. I know exactly what's going to happen. I'm good to go.
Yeah.
I can save this money. And inevitably, at least for me, 60, 90, 120 days, I keep getting further away. And I'll call them back up. I'm like, hey, I need coaching.
Right, exactly. Dude, I'm the same. Like coaches need coaches too. Like I've said I've got the business ones, but I also have ones that do my programming too. I mean, I like, and part of this, and what's really cool about, to bring it back to the podcast too, is just the ability to connect with so many cool people that I would otherwise not be able to have really deep conversations with. I'm sure you experience this too. Like it's such a great tool to be able to have awesome conversations. And I've met amazing coaches through this podcast that since I've started, I've done a couple of blocks with a couple of them just because I'm so bought into what they're doing after talking to them. Like that was kind of like their, their interview call with me was the podcast. I'm like, dude, let's do a 90-day or a 6-month block. I'm ready. And it's been awesome because I can get to explore some other things that then I get to apply back to my guys that I coach. And that's kind of like how I'm kind of like the guinea pig for myself for a lot of the programs. Like I'll have coaches that I like work with me on stuff so I can be exposed to new things. And then I go and I translate that back to the guys that I work with too.
And I think that speaks volumes about you, that you're willing to set aside your ego or whatever you want to call it and learn, say, hey, what can I learn from this person? What can I learn from this guest that then I can in turn apply to and help my clients?
And that might be, I might take that too far sometimes because I still get like the shiny object syndrome, just like a lot of people do when they're on a training program. They'd be like, oh, I've been on this one for a couple of weeks. It's kind of working, but this one over here looks really cool. I'm going to go try that one. And they never really give it enough time. Like I'm totally guilty of having those thoughts sometimes too, because like I'll be in the middle of a training program and I just recorded a podcast the other day with a guy out of Nova Scotia who's mobility, like a flexibility, old time strongman lifts type stuff. And it's killer. And I'm like in the middle of this other block and I talk to him. I'm like, ooh, maybe I want to go have Lucas coach me for a little bit. I'm like, no, I got to finish this program first. Then I'll talk to Lucas.
And I can admit I'm guilty with that. I'm pretty good staying the course on training, but I would hop around nutritionally.
Oh yeah.
And I would, well, this guy says high carbs. This person says high fat. If I combine them, this has to work perfect.
It's just high everything.
High everything.
Exactly. It's just, what am I hungry for? I'm going to find the guy that says I can do that.
Yeah. So then I'm going to combine that with the if it fits your macros people, and then I'm just going to eat everything I want.
Oh man, that's great.
Well, I really enjoyed this. I appreciate you taking the time. I have one last question that I always like to ask our guests, and that's kind of a pivot question of, I always feel like something has happened in our lives at one point or the other, good or bad when it happened, that kind of set us on the path that we are now. I know like for me personally, I have certain things that if I really sit down and, narrow it down, I can always come back to like this one point that kind of changed everything for me. Do you have anything like that?
Man, that's a good question. I don't know if I could say there's one. There's probably several. From and probably in several different categories of my life. I would say the main one or a big one was a faith-based one. When I was 13 was when I was baptized, and that was huge. I mean that's as big as it gets, right? I mean, like that really kind of changed the trajectory of eternity, right? So that was a huge one for me. And that's been a major part of my life ever since. And another one would have been Man, it sounds like it was it sounds like it might be kind of silly because it doesn't seem like at the time it would have been very significant. But the decision I made to leave the sport that I loved my entire life in the middle of playing it in football and college actually set up about 10 other things that fleshed themselves out. So at the time, it was just like, it was really hard for me to make that decision. But part of it was me feeling confident. It was like really the first time I felt confident making a massive life decision like that for myself, rather than having it be a parent decision or a coach decision. Like that was the real first one that I had.
And that's interesting because so many times you see athletes get caught up in that identity of being an athlete.
Yes.
And they wrap everything they do around, if I'm not an athlete, then what?
Yes, exactly. And when I made the call to leave, it was, I was doing 2 sports at the same time in college, and it was the nightmare on my body. And so I was like, well, what's the one that's going to take me farther and have me be healthier? And it was not football, not surprisingly. But that was what I loved my entire life. And like I said, that was when I made that decision, I made it by myself. I didn't like ask like, hey, is it okay if I do this? Or what do you guys think about this to my parents or to my friends or anything like that? I'm like, this is what's best for me. And I know that. And again, that seems like a fairly insignificant decision, but the act of making that decision really was the first one where I'm like, okay, I can do some stuff now and feel good about how I make decisions.
Well, and that probably, fast forward a few years when you decided to leave the box gym.
Yeah.
You probably were able to draw back on, I've made these big decisions before in my life. I have the confidence that I know what's best for me.
Yeah, definitely. And the belief in myself to be able to do that and then stay by it and not have like the week later, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to write it out. I'll figure it out.
Be able to trust it and go all in with your belief or your decision.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this has been awesome. I appreciate it. Where can everybody find the podcast? Where can they find you, or where's the best place to find you?
Yeah,
is it Instagram, your website?
Instagram is where I'm most active. I have a Twitter, I have a Facebook, so you can just search Ross Hillier on those. On Instagram, it's Coach Ross Hillier. The podcast, the Nomad Strength Show, it's everywhere that podcasts are. Scott, you were on an episode a few months back, right after Winter Strong, which was a great one. Had some awesome people on, and again, it's just like a huge opportunity to just talk to rad people that I would never otherwise be able to. And so, and you mentioned earlier the Patreon we just launched last year. That is, you can search Nomad Strength Show on Patreon. It'll bring it right up.
Okay.
And if you want to be a part of, get some exclusive content, that kind of stuff, there's all kinds of different things that I'm throwing in there. It's not just a podcast. There's all kinds of things I'm doing in there for exclusive content and stuff, which is pretty fun. So
if somebody wants to work with you, where's the best place to start that process?
Yeah, you can go to nomad-strength.com. There's some info there, or you can just reach out to me on Instagram. I'm usually pretty good about DMing if you've got questions about programs or upcoming the Foundations course, the 6-week program. Just reach out to me there, and we'll set up a call and get you straightened away.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. And thank you guys, everybody, for listening. I appreciate it. If you have any questions, suggestions, let us know at podcast@volquartsen.com.